Sifu is the latest skill-intensive action game to be released, and this is one of those games that your enjoyment of it is going to be based on how much you enjoyed Sakuro's kind of defense-focused design, and your own, tolerance towards frustration and death. Sifu is a game that is pretty much playing a martial arts revenge movie. When your father is murdered while you were a child, you decide to spend the rest of your life training to take revenge on the 5 people responsible for it. And the game itself is played out over 5 different locations as you take on the many people standing in your way to get to those 5 targets. Now, from a kind of aesthetics and animation standpoint, Sifu is really great. I like the detail of the environment. Some of the later areas are really well defined in terms of what you can look at and explore. And the combat itself plays out really nicely. A lot of the beatdown moves, you can just feel the impact when you land those final blows. Now, people have described Sifu as kind of roguelike or roguelike adjacent, and I wouldn't go that far with its design. Each area is 100% linear. All the enemies are in the same spots, all the encounters are the same no matter what. What does change as you go through is that there is a form of persistence. When you die, you are able to spend your experience and your points in order to unlock new moves. Keep spending points in them to add permanent points. When an ability has enough permanent points, it becomes locked forever. You are free to replay each individual level or just restart the entire run when you completely fail. Now, how the game balances all this out is that you are given a magic amulet, and your age, that's in the upper left, determines your overall, length or your lives in the game. Every 10 years, your character will actually age up, increasing the damage they do but lowering their max overall health. You'll have to survive until basically age 80 or somewhere in the late 70s, depending upon how many times you die in a row, before you basically just die of old age. Every time you are killed, you build up a kind of death multiplier that increases the amount of ages you'll go up on each subsequent death. And this multiplier will decline or decrease when you kill a major enemy or complete a section in the level. Now, one thing that I do like about Sifu's environmental design or level layout is that the game handles shortcuts by you finding clues and keys in each level. So on your first time through, you'll have to go the long way through a level. But once you find a security guard's key or another way, you can completely bypass quarters, chunks, or sometimes even the entire level just to get to the boss fight. And those kinds of elements remain permanently unlocked once you've gotten to them. Now, let's talk a little bit about combat, as there is certainly a lot going on with Sifu. As I said at the Stinger, that Sifu definitely owes a lot of its combat philosophy to Sakuro. And that comes in with how the game is very defense focused. You have multiple ways of avoiding or mitigating damage. You have a standard block, you can perfect block to parry, you have dodge up, dodge down, and a general dodge, and you'll also gain access to special moves that can interrupt certain enemies if you have enough focus. Now, how this all plays out is, as you've been watching the footage, every time an enemy or you are hit by an attack, you'll build up what's called a structure meter. And the structure meter is essentially like poise from Sakuro. When the meter is completely full, the character breaks, and this allows you to set up for a one-hit kill, or if it's done to you, you will become staggered and open to a lot of damage. And every enemy can be beaten either by poise breaking, or by just beating them up outright. Now, when it comes to the other defensive maneuvers, dodging is very important. There are enemies who can deliver massive attacks that can easily fill and break your poise, and you'll need to dodge those moves in order to create an opening. And this is a major point about how the combat is balanced that I'll talk about in the second part of this video. But As you go through, the game will introduce new enemy types, and as well as more advanced fights along with the 5 main bosses, which play out in very over-elaborate and very detailed environments and challenges. Now, if you want to go through the entire game, it is quite easy once you kind of get used to it. And much like Sakuro, this is one of those games that it's going to make you learn its design whether you want to or not. And that kind of takes me to my main issue that I have with the game. And what does it mean to master Sifu? And we're going to talk about that next, but first we're going to take a quick break. If you're interested in my thoughts on design, then check out my game design books. For entry-level students, we have 20 essential games to study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with more coming soon. When we look at kind of how action game design has evolved over the past decade, we still have kind of like 2 broad schools of design. One is the more like improvisation, multiple routes of getting through combat that we see from, say, a Souls-like, Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and so on. And then we have what kind of Sakuro define as a very defense-focused, very pattern-reading and pattern-driven gameplay. And that's where Sifu lands. Over the course of playing through the game, this is a title that will, pull you by the scruff of your shirt through its combat system. And the way it does it is just what I'm not a huge fan of, and I was not a big fan of Sakuro either, despite beating it and both Sifu here. So how this plays out is that the enemy's defense is kind of pre-programmed or pre-pattern based. If you attack an enemy when kind of they are in quote-unquote defensive mode or they're in counter mode, they will just auto-block or just auto-counter your moves. Enemies will oftentimes have super armor when they're doing attacks. You can't actually interrupt them for the most part when they're coming at you with a stronger combo. Instead, the game is entirely focused on you defending, countering, and dodging attacks. I had a hard time reading when I was pulling off the perfect parries as well throughout the game, but how this works is that the last hit of a combo is the most important one when you are trying to counter an enemy. If you perfect parry that last hit, I believe it staggers them for a split second. I do know that when you dodge that last hit, no matter how many of the other hits in that combo you blocked or got hit by, the character will slow down. You'll see their animation kind of go down to half speed for a split second. That's your cue that the enemy is now vulnerable to your own attack. And while enemies do make use of random patterns, they only have a few fixed patterns of attacking based on your position and what phase of the fight you're in. So in essence, Sifu feels more like a QTE driven style defense rather than giving you multiple avenues for getting through it. Really, you only have 2. Do you dodge all the attacks, or do you attempt to parry all the attacks? And there really is no other way to get around some of these fights. The later bosses, especially the final boss, is such a pattern-driven fight that it's basically about you doing what you can to survive until you get those safe or quote-unquote safe patterns that will allow you to counter and actually do damage or structure to them. Now, I did like some of the aspects of this game. Again, the exploration for clues and shortcuts was well done. The only kind of run-focused progression that you've seen during this video is when you find dragon statues that let you upgrade one of several different stats, but only for that individual run. That will not carry over. So again, with this kind of gameplay, Sifu is either going to be ridiculously easy for you, to the point that you could probably beat this in less than 30 minutes and won't even, have any kind of exhaustion, or you are going to get stuck at this game and it is going to be painful. Now, one other point about this game, and this is something I want to ask to the people who played Sifu who are probably watching this. Did the camera give you as much trouble as I did? As there were a lot of cases during boss fights where the camera was just constantly moving and kind of swinging around, or I'm sorry, rotating, and it made it very hard to keep track of enemies' attacks and what they were doing during the fight. And I don't know if that was by the design of the game, or was that like a dead zone issue on one of my analog sticks. Because I was watching someone else play this game after I finished it, and it didn't seem like it was that bad for them. But this definitely caused me a lot of problems, especially during the later or the last two bosses. So, with all that said, Sifu is either going to be one of your favorite action games you've played or one of your least, and it really comes down to what you thought of Sakuro. If you enjoyed Sakuro for its defense focus and definitely more about reading patterns than kind of you being the aggressor, then you are going to love Sifu. But if you're more of a fan of, again, like the Devil May Cry style, or even stuff like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, then how rigid this game be may not be the best action game for you. But it is certainly an interesting game. I would love to see what the developers could do in a sequel, or expand on these various loops. So with that said, thank you so much for watching the video. If you're new, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. Check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.